Well, now if you're trying to do like watch a moon landing, you're like, fuck, all right, where's the streaming? And then you like look on your phone, you're like, it's on fucking TV. Like, how do I get this? How do I
Yeah, yeah,
even
yeah.
watch this?
I guess I
I
have to
gotta get
subscribe to YouTube TV and
I gotta
like,
get an illegal stream going. Like, all right, where do I go on Reddit to find this?
exactly.
I
Finally,
watched.
I finally,
Watched. I
finally,
watched. I
finally,
watched.
I finally,
Watched.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of I Finally Watched. This is David.
And this is Alon, and I finally watched Apollo 13.
I also finally watched Apollo 13.
Oh. I don't know why I had in my head that you have already seen this movie.
It's because you don't pay attention when other people talk.
That's true. That's true. But also I feel like this movie was really really popular in like especially like your age range when it came out.
When I was 8,
When you were 8 8 years old. I guess I'm saying like maybe people our age or like a little older than me, which would be you. Uh some people have this movie as like their favorite movie of all time.
you could say that every time we do an episode, you could be like, some people have this as their favorite.
Some people. But I don't see how. Here's my hot take. 5-second hot take. This movie's kind of boring.
Yeah, you said that to me earlier before we started, and I had like 45 minutes left, and I, after finishing it, I disagree with you. So it's interesting. It's like, so you and I both, we did The Martian earlier. I think we both really like that. The Martian's like one of my favorite movies, and that's just sort of an updated version with also like a lot of comedy. What's interesting about this movie, at least to me, is that I purposely, normally I would look up what happened because I'm like, I don't want to watch a movie where people die and not know it and just get surprised by it, like
Right.
like a true story. I had that happen with a documentary on Netflix where I was just watching it, and then at the end, it's like, oh yeah, the dude died. I was like, well, fuck me. Um, and so I like was like, I was pretty sure they made it, but in the back of my head, I was like, I do know that some of these missions were not successful, and I didn't have like it memorized or anything. So I found it like similar to like the end of The Martian, where spoiler, Mark Watney lives. Um, I got really fucking choked up at the end of this movie. Like the ending like was really effective for me, and I feel like in saying earlier that it's a procedural, it's kind of like a newspaper story movie or like a
Right.
cop drama, right? Like it's just
Right.
like going through the process. And I think this movie is also, from what I read, fairly accurate to the details. And so for the most part. And so I think that can come off a little bit as boring, but like I also felt like it was super tense during it, at different points here and there. I will say too, the timing of it, I know I'm rambling on for a while, but I'm getting a lot of thoughts out here. The timing of the movie I found interesting because it like felt like for 2 hours and 20 minutes, like they really rushed the beginning to get us on this fucking like
Sure.
ship,
Sure, yeah.
but it's also like it is a longer movie. But it feels like nothing, it feels like not a lot happens. Like they speed through a lot of things, but it's still 20 minutes, it's 2 hours and 20 minutes.
So I was watching The Mighty Ducks recently, and in The Mighty Ducks 2, they have like I'm getting to a point here. Stop,
I
don't
hope
laugh.
so.
But what I'm saying is that in The Mighty Ducks 2, they add a lot of new team members to the already established team, and the old team members and the new team members are like at odds and ends with each other, but then like you have like the actual opposing team, like the actual antagonist of the movie, and they have that, right? So they very quickly have to have like a scene that like brings the new members and the old members together so that they can both be against the antagonist for the rest of the movie. And that's how I kind of felt here, where it's like they had to get these 3 dudes in this fucking rocket in space real quick because you have to spend the majority of the movie in space, or else like what's the fucking point? And getting there, like getting to that point, even when they're in space, I was just like, and maybe this is like because you said we've seen so many really amazing space movies since, it just was like really really boring. Where the movie got interesting to me was the moment where the CO2 oxygen was causing issues, and then the um what do you call the people on the ground, like Houston, what do you call that, a operation base, I guess you would say,
Sure.
where they have to figure out how to get the square attached to the round thing, and then they have to give him, and then they get the guy who supposedly had the measles. They have to like bring him in to like help them. I felt like at that point the movie really picked up, and then I was like pretty invested in it from that point to the end.
Uh yeah, I mean, so we're 50 minutes in when he like what stirs the oxygen tanks and they explode.
Right? Still was not interested in that movie.
You really make yourself laugh. I was. I like I get your point that it was slow, but I also just like I don't know, I was enjoying all of it. There's really a couple things I read. One is that Ron Howard directed this, and dude, go through his IMDb sometime. It is eclectic to
Yeah.
say the least.
This did not feel like a Ron Howard. Like this felt like a Spielberg at times.
Yeah, which I think he like collaborated with Spielberg on a lot of like the technical issues of this. But he had the test audience write out like note cards about their feelings of the movie, and one of the audience members was like, "This is such Hollywood bullshit. Like, there's no way they would have survived in the end of this." It's just like,
That's
okay.
funny.
And then like I don't know, the other thing he apparently there wasn't as much tension amongst the astronauts. There wasn't a like blaming of like, oh, you did this or you did this. And Ron Howard's comment was like, yeah, I mean, you can't show the 3 astronauts sweating for 2 hours like to show that there's that this is going poorly. Like you have to add other stuff to make it more cinematic. But I kind of like, even in presuming that everything turned out all right, because I don't think you're going to show it to like, you can't show a 2 hour and 20-minute movie of us with these 3 people and then just have them die on reentry. Like it's not going to
like
go well.
they're like, oh, it's past the 4-minute mark. And then like as everyone has a worried look on their face, it just fades to black. Just the credits start rolling.
There were no survivors.
There were no survivors. And it's funny too. It's like, and I'm not saying there weren't good moments up to that point where I started getting really invested in them. I think one of the strongest and also like one of the funniest moments in the movie is where they're panning, and like you're following this like white vest, and like slowly it gets to Ed Harris, and then the reveal of Ed Harris. I think that was really, really well done. I enjoyed that. And then a lot of stuff with like the wives, I guess I should say, or the / girlfriends of all the astronauts, them being mentally prepared for what's happening to their husband. I thought that was really interesting stuff. But the space stuff where it was just a moment of like Tom Hanks is like, all right, Commander, we're about to launch, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, all right, we're ready for you, blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh my God, get on with it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I disagree, right? Like I will say that as the movie started, I was like, all right, let's fucking get in space. And then one thing that, in not knowing what happens in the movie, I was like kind of waiting for the moment for something bad to happen. Like I didn't know if they landed on the moon and then the fuck up happened on the moon or on the return trip. Like
Yeah.
I purposely went in not knowing anything. And so when he flicks that thing to stir the oxygen and it fucking explodes, and like you're like I see something seeping out. I'm pretty sure it's our oxygen. um, it's just kind of like, and then Houston, we have a problem. Like at that point, it's like, oh shit, okay, so this is when it happens. And so I was like, I was just interested in what happened in the movie. So like the fact that it was kind of slow in spots here and there, I do think it starts out slow and it kind of builds, and like the last hour are like, I was like really, really into it, really invested.
I will say that, like, as far as the CGI goes, with like emulating the rocket when we see it launching and like all the ice breaking off of, I guess that's ice breaking off of the launch pad thing.
Yeah.
Um, because don't they have to like put liquid nitrogen all over it so that it like doesn't fucking burn up? I don't know, whatever.
I don't work with NASA.
Sure. Me either. And then like when we see it in space and stuff, I thought that was so well done for like 1995. Come on, that was really good.
Well, apparently people with NASA like were like, hey, can we use that video for like
That's good. That's good. But yeah, and you were saying The Martian has a lot of humor in it, much more than this one for sure. But then moments where you have like, we have launch and you see their urine like coming out of the spaceship and stuff like that. There's some good moments. And then it's like you can't help but having like good rapport between like probably the three best actors of that time period. Tom Hanks, Kevin Bacon, and Bill Paxton. It was just a great dynamic to have.
it's like you can't even realize unless you watch like all of these movies from the 90s how fucking big Kevin Bacon was. Because
Right.
I mean, he still does a lot of stuff, and you see him, you're like, oh, that's fucking Kevin Bacon. But like, going toe to toe in these movies with like Tom Hanks. You know what I mean? Tom Hanks has kind of continued that run his entire career, but like Kevin Bacon at that point was kind of as big.
Yeah.
So let's just get to the top. It starts with Apollo 11 and the moon landing. I like the little line where he tells his kid to get a haircut. Like it sort of sets the stage. One thing about seeing this movie in 2023, seeing a 1995 movie in 2023, it makes the 1969, 1970s ness of the movie seem so much more ancient, because like I'm sure in 1995 it's like, oh, this still kind of looks newer, but
Oh,
now
right.
seeing it like what, for 28 years later, we're like, oh, it looks so old, it's so dated.
It's like when you watch Grease, right? It's an 80s movie emulating the 50s. Or like even Back to the Future, it's an 80s movies where they go back to the 50s. It's like the 50s is like 70 years ago. But now it just feels like it really feels like 70 fucking years ago.
Yeah. And so then you have like they're watching the moon landing, and you have this like iconic shot of Walter Cronkite like shaking his head, just like in disbelief
Right.
about like what we've done. And apparently Cronkite like recorded extra lines for this movie. But what's funny is then that's like sort of juxtaposed with this movie is Apollo 13. We're 2 missions later, and like the news couldn't give a shit about the moon landing anymore until someone's about to die. They're like not even broadcasting it.
I was thinking about that too, because I was thinking like in 2023, if US astronauts were going up into the moon, we would think that would be cool, right? And I don't think we've gone to the moon in a while, have we?
I don't remember.
Yeah, but it's been a bit, and I was just thinking like that would be cool, but also not very surprising because how far our technology has come in the sense that like we're aware like how advanced we are. But then I'm thinking like back in like 1970s or like a 1990 movie taking place in the 1970s, thinking, dude, how cool would it be? It's like you still have those big box TVs. And then you look up in the sky, it's like, yeah, a fucking man's been up there,
Well, now if you're trying to do like watch a moon landing, you're like, fuck, all right, where's this streaming? And then you like look on your phone, you're like, it's on fucking TV. Like, how do I get this? How do I even watch this?
I guess I have
gotta
to
get
subscribe to YouTube TV and like
I gotta get an illegal stream going. Like, all right, where do I go on Reddit to find this?
exactly.
I also find funny too is that like, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, we think of those people as like demigods. And
Right.
so in the beginning of this movie, to have these guys like shitting on them a little bit and like just like, oh, these fucking assholes who like get to be the first on the moon, I thought was funny. Like it's like a fraternity, right? Like they're just all these guys that are like jockeying for position, and like these two happen to be the ones to get it. Is the way
I
they make it seem.
I will say the best moment in the movie is when we see those two characters with his mother, and then she's like, "Are you doing the space program too?"
Yeah, that was hilarious. That is Ron Howard's mother.
Oh, she
Yeah.
did a very good job.
I like how they're trying to distract her, and she's just like, "Shut the fuck up, Buzz. I'm
I
watching
was
something."
It was so sad with her, like, just staying on her character for a little bit. It was so sad that she couldn't get like that feed in her nursing home.
No, well, no. The point of that was like they weren't showing it. It wasn't she couldn't get the feed. They weren't. The news wasn't showing it. And then once shit went awry, they started showing it, and they wanted her to be with the family in case he died.
Okay. I missed that. See, this is why we talk about things.
We're gonna change the name to David Explains the Movie. So
Wow.
it now.
It's a little confusion and I get crucified for it, but thanks.
So we get the setup that Alan Shepard gets an ear infection, so Hanks is going to be on 13, and he tells his wife, and she's like, "Why does it have to be 13?" He's like, "Because it comes after 12."
They kind of linger on the whole 13 being like the unlucky number for a while in this movie, and I was just thinking like, yeah, I guess like you're you're about to give your life up to like outer space, and the vessel you so happen to put it in is like one of the unluckiest number in the world. I guess it was a big deal at that time when they were going up. But then you have that whole thing with Gary Sinise. I don't know.
Gary Sinise.
Gary Sinise. Lieutenant Dan is how I recognize him.
Lieutenant Dan.
But you don't have no legs, Lieutenant Dan.
I don't know how he can be an astronaut without any legs.
When I was waiting for Tom Hanks to say to him at any given point. But yeah, so he was exposed to the measles, so he's like kicked off too, and that's where you bring in Kevin Bacon. And I think they have this like party scene in the very very beginning in the movie, which is really smart because you're introduced to all of these characters at the same time, and then you find out like, oh, Kevin Bacon's not even gonna go on, and then you're like, oh, okay, they did this thing where it's like now he's gonna get on.
Yeah, so Hanks was hired for this. John Travolta was offered it and turned it down. He was also offered Forrest Gump, turned that down. And
Good.
so Hanks,
Good.
yeah, John Travolta as
As
Forrest Gump is like screen test footage I want to see.
Yeah.
But so Hanks got the role, and then they just went to Sinise and were like, "You can have whatever role left you want." So like when he gets kicked off the mission, I was like, I feel bad for Sinise, like not getting like the cool part. And then it turns out like it is the cool part for the rest of the movie, and it's like he's like, I want to be the guy who sort of saves their asses down there. There is like the funny line too that like Kevin Bacon's character was like, "Oh, I wish you were up here," and he's like, "I bet you do."
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and what's so funny is like Kevin Bacon's character, and this is another thing too. It's like whenever you're depicting real people's lives, and this is kind of how I felt with Oppenheimer too, is like you're given sort of a liberty to make them say and act however you want to make them say and act as the director, and so it's like, but you still, I guess, you have to stick to a certain like closeness to how they actually were, and so like I don't know, you have Tom Hanks, which is kind of, I guess Tom Hanks and Bill Paxton characters are quite similar. And then you have Kevin Bacon all the way over here being like, "Oh, I'm not, no one can tie me down." And then he gets the call that he's on and he's like, "Woohoo!" Like, like he sees it as like almost an adrenaline opportunity sort of thing, which is different than how the other two guys see it, which I found interesting dynamic.
Well, too, and they have the scene where Sinise is training, and they're like, "All right, you did it great," and he's like, "Yeah, but I could have done it better. Like, we got to do it again." Like, "But you did it fine." He's like, "Yeah, but let's get it perfect." And Hanks is like, "Okay, well, fine, let's get it perfect." To then cut to when Bacon is brought on the team, he like messes up, and they're like, "Well," they're like all like, "Oh shit!" And it's 2 days before, and they're like, "Well, I mean, Sinise wouldn't have gotten it the first time either, so whatever." But that is like they are setting up. It's like this central conflict that didn't really happen that they are adding to the movie
Right,
to
right.
give it this like little bit of whatever. One of the things I read was that a lot of people kind of there's some symbolism sort of stuff in the beginning of this. One was so she drops her ring in the shower,
Yeah.
and then she's like, oh, the number 13, and people are like, oh, that's a little heavy handed, like the doom aspect of this, like, oh, but those two things like kind of really happen. The other thing I noticed too is Hanks is driving his Corvette, and this guy comes up to the line. He's like, "Are you fucking astronaut? Hell yeah, man!" And then takes off, and then Hanks sputters, and he's like, "Oh, that's the second time that's happened." And just before that in the movie, he had talked about the other mission where
Right.
astronauts like I either died or almost died. And so when he's like, "That's the second time that's happened," he's like, "Oh, he's now about to go on the mission where it's the second time that's happened." Um, like there's a lot of like a little bit like you could say it hits you over the head a little bit too much with it, but I thought it was for 1995. I thought it was fine.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, yeah, it's all of like manifest destiny, right? It's like if you think too much about like that sort of thing, like I'm on the unlucky number Apollo flight. Um, maybe the way you handle things, you're a little too nervous, you're a little too jumpy, and then that affects like your actual like outcomes of the things you're doing, right? Um, but so anyways, yeah, we get to they're in space, the thing blows up, and now they have to kind of problem solve I like, and I think you were saying this earlier, is that Kevin Bacon fucking up the whole thing by like not mixing the oxygen correctly, Bill Paxton being like, you didn't mix the oxygen correctly, and all of that tension is coming to a head. And then Tom Hanks's character is there to be like, whoa, guys, like we don't need this. Like all of this animosity and like fighting about it is not going to help us get back. And like
Well, then
it
you find out
quickly
that
was resolved.
and you find out that he didn't actually do anything wrong. And
No,
Hanks even says that he's like, I would have done the exact same thing. And in the movie, you find out like it was literally just a thing that it like we're getting to the ending quick, but like when he's like, oh, it was a thing that happened 2 years before I even became like a commander with NASA or whatever
which
he
is
says the timeline.
insane to think that those vessels are built like so far ahead of time.
What it reminds me of is a little bit of like if you like play it out in your head. He's like, so this thing was built on an assembly line, and then it was on a collision course to almost kill me in space. It kind of reminds me of like that scene in Benjamin Button where like Kate Blanchett gets injured, and she's like, if you had just stayed at the cafe too long, if you had just done this or this, like all the
Oh yeah, yeah.
things that had to happen for this fuck up, like they just happened to get on the one that was built with this part that was messed up. I don't know. It's like a cool little thing that they just kind of gloss over at the ending in the narration. Um, we already talked about. I do want to back up a little bit just to cover some of the points, like how beautiful the launch was.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's this funny line where like the wives are talking after the launch, and the reporters run up, and she's like, "Remember, you're proud, happy, and thrilled." And they're like, "How are you feeling?" She's like, I'm just so thrilled and really proud and just happy."
Like she said it verbatim. Yeah, yeah. No.
Yeah.
I thought that was fun. And then like, oh, the moment, dude, the moment where they're having the trouble. The guy goes up at the door and says like, "Hey, the reporters want to put like an antenna in your front yard to do live feed from it." And she's like, "You can just tell them to fuck right off." Basically, like, like they weren't interested 5 seconds ago when everything was fine and they go into the moon, but now everything's, a freaking disaster and now they're so interested in it. I feel that too. It's like imagine how those kids feel where it's like your dad's going to the moon, but then he's about to die. Like he's about to really die. You're about to lose your dad. And then all of a sudden the whole fucking world is like projecting that on you.
Well, and also like, what the fuck are the NASA people doing? Not just telling them to fuck off. Like what he's like trying to get her to do it.
I know, right?
Yeah, like what the
For
fuck
like
is your problem?
publicity, for like NASA publicity.
It's not good publicity. Like she's not going to say anything positive about NASA right now. Um, so we're at the point where the thing happens. Houston, we have a problem, and this like there's just so much like technical jargon going on right now, and I was like, I'm not following any of it,
No.
and I don't think it matters. And then you're just basically like, hey, we're losing oxygen, and you need to close the valves on 1 and 3. And then Hanks gives that line. That means he's like, all right, we're gonna do it. And that means we lose the moon. Like with that decision, which is the only decision, right? But there is this internal battle with him of like the only thing he wants, and almost to like the detriment of his safety, is to land on the moon. Like it's all he's been thinking about.
Right. Right. And I guess they could have, right? They could have just landed on the moon and just died on the moon. Like if you wanted it that bad.
Probably crash landed.
But yeah, so at that point they lose the moon, and then closing those 2 valves too
Doesn't work.
It not only does it not work, but then it has the external problem of filling up the vessel with CO2.
Right. But like the immediate problem is they're like, well, all right, what do we fucking do? And they're like, oh, we have to go in the LEM, which is like another piece of the ship that's, I guess that's just always the return vehicle.
Smaller though, right? Smaller.
Yeah, but I think that's always the thing they were going to return on. But now it's like they have to just be in it the whole time. And they're like, how long does it take to prepare that? And he's like, 3 hours. And it's like, you have 15 minutes until you die.
Right.
The other thing that I noticed from this movie, and it's really funny, and it's like how they talk, but it's a little jarring when they keep saying it, is like everything they do, they need the procedures. Like the step-by-step
yeah.
procedures of like how to, and so they're always like, need the procedures. And I'm just like, it's such an odd way to talk about it, but it's like there is so little room for error that everything has to be done to the procedures.
With the moment when they're like they have to shut off the power, right? And then Ed Harris gets in that room with the blackboard, and he's like, this is the flight plan? Forget the fight. Forget the flight. Forget everything you know about the flight plan. And apart from Ed Harris, like all the other actors, like Clint Howard is in this, right?
Who the fuck's Clint Howard?
Clint Howard is that balding guy who's like,
I don't think his name's Clint.
His actor name. His name in the movie is Cy.
Yeah, no, I know. Oh, it is Clint. His name's Clint. Anyway, that's Ron Howard's brother. I never knew that his first name was. I probably did, and I forgot
this guy. Yeah, right. So I never
Yeah.
knew this was Ron Howard's brother, but I know him because he was in a horror movie called Ice Cream Man. I think it was called Ice Cream Man. It's like a cult classic, horrible movie. Anyways, so I was like watching this, I was like, oh fuck, that's Ice Cream Man. Ice Cream Man in there. But then like a bunch of really like kind of semi-famous actors that we kind of like know by their face, but not really by their name, obviously. You're not knowing Clint. But
And his name was Howard.
They're all in this like command room.
No, absolutely. There's even like oh fuck, okay. I was like, there's the one guy who's like the good-looking dude who's like kind of communicating with them a lot, and I was like, what do I know him from? And he's like the quarterback from The Replacements. His name's Brett Cullen, and he's like the guy who's the starting quarterback that Keanu Reeves takes over his job, which is a football movie you probably haven't seen.
It's exactly that.
When we do football month, that's gonna be really exciting.
No, we're doing football.
We're going to do Kevin Costner sports movies.
Ooh, okay.
So Tin Cup, For Love of the Game. I don't really want to do Draft Day, so I don't know. Bull Durham.
You realize this is going to literally be like a year from now. This is you're talking about the lineup for our like June, July 2024.
I mean, that's if it makes it to 2024. We'll probably do like 17 other things before then. I'm sure there's movies we've talked about doing that we still haven't gotten to. So,
yep.
So yeah, that what's his name? Ed Harris takes them all in a room, and he's like, "All right, slingshot or just turn around." And I was like, "Well, dude, I've seen so many of these movies. You always
slingshot.
You always have to fucking slingshot. There's no other option.
Exactly.
How do you even stop it? You just like hit the brakes, and you're like, Turn like you have to slingshot, and like they're arguing about it, and Ed Harris is like, oh well, we don't even know if this works, so we can't. We're fucking slingshotting it. And I like there's this Clark Kent looking dude in the back who doesn't say anything.
Oh yeah.
But the camera keeps showing him, and I was like, all right, well, he's gonna have a major role in this movie.
Yeah, and one of like a really cool moment too is when Gary comes back onto the scene and he's like, I need everything in front of me that they have on the thing because we need to like problem solve and I need to know exactly what they have to utilize. And when they have to like, and I don't even think it's him, I think it's a different team that has to get the CO2 ventilator. It's like it's a square, and they have to get it connecting to the vent, which is like the round tube, right? It's like putting a triangle through a square hole. It's like, well, not quite, like that line. And so they get a team together, and he's like, you have to figure this out with the materials that they have, and all you have is this. And they lay it out on the table. When they do it, one of the coolest moments in the movie, but when they do it and they have to relay that to the team in space, and they're like, what's the procedures? And they're like, okay, we kind of wrote new ones for this one, boys.
Well, he's also like, all right, you have the manual? He's like, yeah, I have the manual. He's like, all right, tear the cover off of it and get rid of the rest of it. You just need the cover for this.
And then Bill Paxton's like, gladly.
And then he's like, oh, what happens if we tear the bag? Can we just tape the bag? And they're all like, oh, fuck. They're like, well, there's one more bag. Why don't you just use the new bag? What's really funny is there's this line in this where the guy who came up with how to put the square into the round hole, they say, hey, you're a real steely-eyed missile man. And I was like, where the fuck have I heard that? And in The Martian, when Rich Purnell, played by Childish Gambino, comes up with the way for them to like save Mark Watney by the crew going back.
Right.
And so then Sean Bean relays that to the crew when Jeff Daniels didn't want him to.
Right.
The crew writes Rich Purnell is a steely-eyed missile man when they say they're going back to get Mark. And I was like, that's where that's from.
And they took it from this movie, obviously, but I wonder where this movie got it from.
I think it's like a thing that's said
That's
in the world of NASA. Like when I had my time there, like people said it,
Oh yeah. I thought what would be cool is that like in the Martian universe, Apollo 13 movie existed and they just took it from that.
Well, I think in the Martian universe, Apollo 13, the real life event happened.
No, not the real life event, but like the movie based on the real life event. And then they're
I'm sure it does exist in that universe. I don't know why it wouldn't. Like,
I guess you're right. Yeah. But anyway, so that's cool. So I didn't even notice that line because that went over my head. But man, I need to watch The Martian again. I'd have a good.
I lit it last, like when I finished this movie, I almost just put The Martian on right afterwards.
Which is another movie that has like a good like beginning portion, but they have to like get to the point where he's already abandoned on Mars, because again the movie
and they do it very quickly.
Yeah,
it's
they
like,
do.
It's like 10 minutes max. So they slingshot around the moon, and then at this point Hanks is like having a vision of himself being on the moon, and he snaps out of it. But like during this part, they're all naming parts of the moon. And I was like, dude, I know zero names for anything on the moon.
Yeah, they're like, that's
the moon.
Marie crater, and that's the Elizabeth Trench. And I was like, why is it all women's names? And then I remembered, I was like, oh, because only men have been on the moon, and of course they're gonna name it like their wives' names or something like that.
And the holes is after women. So yeah, now the Clark Kent looking motherfucker is like, hey, we have to get down to 12 volts or we won't make it to anywhere near Earth. And I was like, okay, that's fine. And they get Sinise up, and he's like, I gotta practice. And then they realize CO2 is becoming a problem. And at some point around this time, Bacon, there's the funny line where he's like, I think Kevin Bacon gave me the clap because it burns when I piss now. So apparently he got a urinary tract infection from the piss tube, but it wasn't from the character Kevin Bacon was playing, but that is like why he got it. But Bacon's like, hey, I did the math and we're about to fucking just miss Earth. And they're like, oh, NASA would tell us that. And then right after that, Houston like calls and they're like, they admit like, oh, the CO2 is going to be a problem, and they like haven't been telling them, so they're all kind of looking around like, oh fuck, if they're admitting that, then maybe they're wrong. And they do later on, they realize, oh fuck, our math was off, and they were just going to miss Earth and just keep going.
What's insane too is like it was around this moment where Sinise was in the simulator trying to figure out how to get down to like the 3 or 4 volts. The line where it's like, it's only 3 or 4 volts, and Sinise is like, was it 3 or is it 4? And then everyone in the room is like, 4. And so it's like that moment was like, because it established that Sinise's character is a perfectionist. If Sinise got into that vessel and Bacon was the one who had to gear them towards safety, they would all fucking die.
Yeah, I mean, for the point of the movie, right? Like in real life, I think it would have been, I don't know, something similar. Apparently the guy Kevin Bacon is playing was a good pilot and astronaut, and the other 2 guys could fly too. Which does lead us to, there's the part where they all pull off their medical tracking equipment because they're like, "Hey, shut the fuck up. We're not going to sleep. We're like, our lives are in danger here. We're not sleeping." Which later on, Kevin Bacon's like, man, I should have fucking slept. I can't even read my own handwriting right now.
I thought it was gonna, like, he was passing in and out, like, you know, where they were doing that POV shot where his vision got real blurry.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that was more from the CO2 poisoning.
Right. And then they have to manually steer to get back on target, which I thought was a really cool part. And fucking Bill Paxton is just like, I can't fucking see shit. Like I'm losing the Earth. Where do I go? One interesting thing about making Bill Paxton have like a venereal disease or whatever, or like,
Right, like he's
But-
very ill.
yeah, so he's dying, so you don't get the Bill Paxton energy that you normally get in a movie like this, where he's like
Yeah, I
going
understand.
a little crazy, like we just did True Lies. You don't. So I don't know if that's the best use of his skills, but I thought he was still great.
The point where they're trying to manually like do the Earth and thing is great, but the scene that I really enjoy is where they're taking the, I guess it's back when they're taking the oh no, it's like when Kevin Bacon is admitting that he needs more sleep, and then the whole interior of the vessel is covered in condensation, and they're like, okay, so all you have to do is like flip this switch, and he's about to, and then he hesitates and he's like, hey, listen, this whole interior is covered in water. What are the chances that it's going to short circuit and like fry me? And like, I like the little look that the guys give down in the command center, and the guy literally just shrugs his shoulders. He's like, I don't fucking know. Like, it's a possibility, Kevin. And he's like, fuck it, whatever, and he does it anyways, and he's fine.
Well, that's the thing too. Like, it doesn't really matter, right? Like, yeah, it could. I mean, there's 1,000 things that could kill you guys right now. You just have to do the things we're telling you because it's like the best chance you have of surviving. So it's just like basically kind of like shut the fuck up. So they get to the point where they're like, all right, hey, we need the re-entry procedures, and then Deke answers, and they all look at each other like, oh fuck, they don't even have it yet. There is like a couple funny points which are sort of subtle here. Like when it happens in The Martian, they spell it out for us, like, hey, you're talking, NASA is a public government entity, so anyone can listen into this, anyone can read what you're saying. But here there's a couple times where like, oh, you're on this frequency, meaning like everyone can hear it. So like they're cursing at certain points, like, oh fuck, we're on the wrong thing. And so like, but when Deke answers, they're just like, oh, we are fucked. Like they don't even have it.
Oh, that's what I was going to say earlier, is that when they're manually like navigating it and they can barely see out that like little triangle window trying to navigate the ship, everyone can hear them being like, all right, go for the left. All right, now take the thing. All right, here we go. And they're like yelling instructions at each other and like really working as a team, but they're doing it in such an aggressive manner. But then everyone, including their wives and mothers back on Earth, can hear them do all that.
No, yeah, exactly. And I mean, I felt like the acting was good on the people watching it. Like the daughter was really good. She
Oh,
had some
yeah,
good
yeah.
crying though.
That's why
But
I
I
thought it
also
was a Spielberg film. Although if it was a Spielberg film, you know, the daughter and the little girl and the son would, and like the son in the military that we don't see until like the last 30 minutes of the fucking movie, they would have like a whole journey within themselves.
it'd be from their point of view.
It would be from their point of view, 100%.
Um, so they get to the re-entry point. There's this part where Hanks takes the pilot seat and Bacon looks over at him and Bacon's just like sad and like, okay, I guess you can have it. And Hanks is like, Force Abbott, no, this is yours. You know, I'm unsure if it was like he was gonna take it and then he like felt bad and was like, no, I shouldn't do this, or if he really just did make a mistake. Um, but I think there is like the movie does create this good arc where they kind of trust Kevin Bacon towards the end of this. Um, but then there's like just all these other issues, right? So they get a typhoon warning, and the guy who tells Ed Harris is like, it could miss them. And Ed Harris is like, only if their luck changes. Like everything is going wrong here. So they have that. Their heat shield is fucked up, which, as we know from the movie Sunshine, the heat shield, very important. Um, and then we get this like 3 minute of blackout when they're landing, and it then takes 4 minutes, and then when you see that thing come through the sky with the parachutes and Tom Hanks says something, I just lost it. I was blubbering like Ed Harris.
I wasn't blubbering, but I was tearing up. Some tears might have fallen. Taylor, because Taylor was listening to me complain how boring the movie is, and then she turns around at me crying at the scene, and she was like, "Oh, boring, huh? Like, is it? Like, is it?" But uh, speaking of like, just real quick about you know, there's like a 3 or 4 movies that have the Apollo name in them, and there's Apollo 13, and then there's a movie I don't know if you've ever seen called Apollo 18.
It's a horror movie.
It's a horror movie, right? And then looking up movies with Apollo in the name, because
Two and a
actually I was,
Half.
yeah, have you heard about that?
Yeah, Richard Linklater. It's like kind of like
His
his
life story.
well, I didn't know that. I just know, I mean, it's obviously it's based on like it's NASA adjacent, and it's also using like similar technology to what's that Keanu movie with Richard Linklater, like the
Scanner
scanner.
Darkly.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think it's
Yeah.
like a very similar like artistic style.
So it's like a from a fourth grader's perspective, but it's supposed to be his life from that perspective. But you've seen it?
No, it's just on Netflix. I knew
Oh,
about it.
I wanna see it because I read up on it and I was interested about that. But one thing that the whole reason I looked up movies with the name Apollo in them is that there's no Apollo 11 movie.
Yeah, I think is the right stuff about Apollo 11.
Well, so is like First Man, right?
Oh yeah, that's true. But it's just not named that. I think it's like kind of too famous to do it. Like it's like almost too obvious.
I guess, yeah.
And then when you have Apollo 13 that's already been done, you're like, all right, well,
Well, if you think about it too, it's like I actually thought Apollo. This is gonna sound dumb, but just follow me here. I actually thought Apollo 13 was about the moon landing. Because I thought that was I didn't realize. I'm not so like savvy with the whole moon landing names and everything, okay? But I thought this was about the moon landing, and I was like, this is not about the moon landing, so what's the fucking point?
the first 5 minutes you see them landing on the moon, like that's a short one.
Okay, guys, and we did it. You know,
So there's the narration at the end. None of them ever flew again. There's this line way earlier in the movie where Tom Hanks is like, this is my last mission because how can I top the moon? And then it's like, how can you top this near survive? Like, how could you look at your wife and kids again and be like, yeah, I'm going to go back up? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like there's no other decision I think you can make right there. Like you've escaped once. But I don't know, just the movie closes very strong. Are you ready for some fun facts? I got a couple.
before we go into the fun facts, there's this moment at the very end where they're like Jack Swigert, Swigart,
I don't know, man. Just Kevin
Kevin
Bacon.
Kevin Bacon's character, Jack Swigert, I think it is.
Swigert.
shut the fuck up, okay? It's Swigert, okay?
I
It's
doubted it.
so Swigert. How else would you pronounce that?
Swigert.
Shit. Whatever. I'm Jack, right? And Tom Hanks is like, so Jack never flew up there again, and he ran for governor and won. And then he was like, and he died of cancer before he could even get to, the seat in the office. And I was like, Jesus, dude, like just throw the fact that he died on us, which I guess you have to say it is because that, he's a real guy and that's what happened in real life. But it always,
I'd leave that part out.
it always reminds me of that scene in Stand By Me. You've seen the movie Stand By Me?
Hot take. Did not like it.
Okay, so here's a spoiler for Stand By Me. I'll give it a second for anyone who doesn't want to Stand By Me spoil for them. At the very end of Stand By Me, it's a very similar scene where the main actor is like, and Lewis graduated from college and moved out of here at the age of 17, or they giving a synopsis on how everyone grew up and went on. And then they took one of the most likable characters in the movie and they were like, John got stuck in a bank robbery and tried to stop it and then got shot 47 times and died. And then like for a movie like that's based on a true story, you can't get away with like saying like the guy died. Okay, he died in real life, so you just mentioned he died of cancer. But a completely fictitious movie where you could write anything about it and then you end on like the saddest fucking note, I'm like, unforgivable.
John went on to molest 12 children.
No. Yeah, that's worse, actually. You're right.
So John Cusack and Charlie Sheen were originally offered the Bill Paxton role, but they turned it down. Brad Pitt turned down an offer to star in this film and instead starred in Seven. I think that's the right decision. And Val Kilmer turned down the role of Jack Swigert in order to film a little movie that we've done and one of my favorites, The Ghost in the Darkness.
All very good decisions because those movies did really well with those specific actors. Although I don't think those specific actors would have lost out being in this film.
It'd be interesting. Like, I don't know. The Bill Paxton character is so muted that it's like, I don't know. It kind of, I think that's interchangeable. Imagining Val Kilmer in this, I think he's fine. He could be fine. I think Kevin Bacon it's funny having just watched this movie, but Kevin Bacon like makes that role his. Like it's hard. It's even just watching it hard to imagine someone else in it. But imagine Kevin Bacon as the Lion Hunter is just impossible to me.
So, you told me to look through Ron Howard movies, like an eclectic group of films that he had. And so I looked it up, and half of these films I didn't even realize he directed.
Yeah.
But like, it's kind of insane to think of like The Da Vinci Code, A Beautiful Mind. This movie, Rush.
There's a bunch of comedies in there too.
The Grinch. Like fucking Solo, Splash, Cocoon.
I never knew he did Solo. That one was like fucking shocking to me.
Cinderella Man. But then you also have like, obviously he's famous for Arrested Development, like creating that whole show. It's Frost Nixon. It's not a comedy, but I didn't know he did it. It's just kind of insane how
Frost Nixon's so good.
All over I've never seen it, but it's kind of insane how all over the place he is.
Yeah. The last fun fact is that I don't know if you noticed this, but Tom Hanks has the red Corvette and then Gary Sinise has his Corvette.
Gold? Yeah.
So apparently there was a program where the Chevrolet dealer and then the president of GM would give astronauts 2 new cars every year.
It's kind of cool.
And most of them apparently chose Corvettes. So.
Well, of course. Yeah. Why not?
I was like, I mean, fucking fly in space and drive Corvettes. So I'm really glad we did this one. It's funny. This happens a lot with you where you're like, I don't know. It's kind of boring. And then as we talk through it, you're just like, you almost convince yourself that you like it.
It's not that. It's like, and quite honestly, the first half plus maybe 5 or 10 minutes or so was just not enjoying this film. And then in the last hour or so, I started to really enjoy the film. And that's honest to God. I'm sticking through that opinion wholeheartedly.
Well, no one try and get him off that opinion.
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason we're doing this movie in the first place is because we decided that September is going to be our like sci-fi space expedition month. So we have this movie, we have Contact, and then we're getting kind of creepier towards the end to transition into our spooky month of October, where we just do like straight up horror movies, kind of like what we did last year.
Except I know nothing about the movie Life. That's like one of those movies that, I love Jake Gyllenhaal, and he has like a ton of those movies that just sort of like come and then kind of like go. Like Everest is another one that like no one
Prince
talks
of Persia. Prince of Persia is one.
People talk about that one for all the wrong reasons. But Life is a movie that sort of just happened and then went, and I have no idea if it's good at all.
Much like life itself.
And then please stop. And then Alien 3 we're going to end it with. It's the only Fincher movie I haven't seen. He disavows it, and that should be fun.
It will be fun.
So thanks for listening to another episode of I Finally Watched. This is David.
And this is Alon, and I finally watched, and we finally watched
Apollo 13.